Symbolic history through sight and sound, 1500, explosive balance. "1500 goes off like one of Leonardo's shrapnel shells, hurled from the foul bombard, shedding small shot, causing, he writes, great terror to the enemy with great loss and confusion. The martial music of Isaac, the unfinished frescoes of battle in which Leonardo and Michelangelo vied on the walls of the Florentine Palazzo Vecchio, set the type of force for centuries, as Rubens made this copy from a copy of the lost Leonardo." How does Renaissance, a point of balance between old and new, cultivating in all arts the myth of calm, Leonardo. Giorgione, this mantuan properly of winds and waters, lirum, bililirum, Sanazzaro's Arcadian dream, alma beata e bella, blessed and beautiful soul, who freed from bonds. How does that promise admit of so fierce a cleavage? Was it the turbulence of shooting in 100 years, the narrows of such a transformation, as from Pisanello's 1415 Luxuria, lean Gothic lust burning its sinful allure? Scotch Dunbar of 1500, still working in that vein. Sum kisses me, sum clappes me, sum kindness me proferis, and a stiff standing thing stifes in me nafe. And Marlowe's lechery flaunting it to the century's end. I am one that loves an inch of raw mutton better than an ell of fried stockfish. Was Renaissance everywhere islanded in a brimstone, which syphilis would fire from the New World, so that Machiavelli's mandragola seduction might curl the fingers of Giorgione's acceptance? What your cunning, my husband's folly, a mother's venality, and the wickedness of a confessor has won me too for a night I wish to have forever. Not to mention the dialogues of Aretino, where of whores, nuns, and wives, only whores ply an honest trade. Ich bin zerfreut aus rotem Mund, von dir, du liebste mein. On the other side, the purity of flesh lured the North too, as in the famous public baths and love-mystic heresy of Adamites. In the Germany where Luther was growing up, Riemenschneider and the Glogauer songbook wreathed the voluptuous garden, not under the law, but under grace, nicht unter dem Gesetz, sondern unter der Gnade. While in the art of Bosch, counterpole to the Italian, equally sought after in Spain, the landscape of venery is composed to such a garden of delights that what stands in the triptych between eating forbidden fruit and choiring in musical hell has been thought one of those Adamitic celebrations of Eros. As the upstaging of sex implies, the bombard of 1500. Is not merely the intensification of war, of those Italian and European battles from which Machiavelli learned lessons as shrewdly real as the Coglione by Leonardo's master Verrocchio. Men must either be caressed or else annihilated. War is not to be avoided and can be deferred only to the advantage of the other side. A prince should therefore have no other aim or thought but war. The end justifies the means. It may be said of men in general that they are ungrateful, voluble, dissemblers, anxious to avoid danger and covetous of gain. So-called virtues may lead to ruin, so-called vices to security. Caesar Borgia's cruelty united the Romagna. It is not merely that such satanic realism, passed down in the faith world, as from Mantegna's soldiers to Leonardo's Anghiari sketches, marks the deepening war, until the French sack of Milan destroys Leonardo's equestrian Sforza, and Boiardo in Florence breaks off the make-believe of his Orlando. Yet even as I sing, O saving God, I see all Italy in flame and fire from these bold Gauls come down again roughshod across our country, wasting everywhere. Less crucial the literal war than the symbolic, that reason long dutiful to creed, even in Roger Bacon, empiricist. We perceive by the first proposition of Euclid that if the person of God the Father be granted, a trinity of equal persons presents itself. As unchecked by brute fact as Honocourt's 13th century geometries left. Reason now, seated in the earth fabric, takes the lead from revealed archetypes. Leonardo, as in the proportions of Vitruvian man, making that natural bondage the object of our love. So the battle to be joined is not of Florence against Pisa, or of Milan against France. It is the battle of values. In ancient times, Machiavelli writes in the Discourses, men were stronger, which I believe founded upon the difference of their religion and ours. The pagan religion deified only men who had achieved great glory, such as commanders of armies and chiefs of republics, placing the supreme good in grandeur of soul, strength of body, and all such qualities as render men formidable. Though this 2nd century B.C. bust, called Scipio Africanus, is not as strong as Michelangelo would have made it. While our religion glorifies more the humble and contemplative than men of action, placing the supreme happiness in humility, lowliness, and a contempt for worldly objects, these principles seem to have made men feeble. Yet even Nietzsche, who followed that line, admits a working paradox, by which denial has stretched the bow of spirit. Like the Hocket dissonance of Guillaume de Machaut, the dragon and beast of the cloister apocalypse, enflame their leviathan depths with a force unparalleled in the ancient world, a volcanism that flung up towers of church and state. Where are all the great Florentines? Dante asks of Ciacco in the mud of the third circle, and hears deeper, among the darker souls, weighed down by sundry crimes. And we see them, magnanimous Farinata, Tegiaio, Brunetto Latini. You taught me how man makes himself immortal. Great-souled heroes in hell. Thus Machiavelli. Doubtless these means are cruel and destructive, neither Christian nor human, and to be avoided. The life of a private citizen would be preferable to that of such a king. Nevertheless, if one wishes to maintain power, it is this that is required. As much as any work of art, the death mask of Lorenzo il Magnifico records that value-cloven pride, mind reaching out to Copernicus in Poland and Columbus in America, the carnival passion of Lorenzo's own songs. Here we are now, old and young, glad and lusty, female, male. Hail to Bacchus, Venus, hail! Join in pleasure, dance, and song. The vanity he faces through it all. Sola sta ferma e sempre dura morte. Nothing holds, nothing endures but death. The alternate words for tunes of delight. How great your beauty and your goodness, virgin, merciful, and holy, Lorenzo himself being patron of doom-preaching Savonarola. How brief and undercut that keenness Florence and the Medici had fostered. Pollaiuolo's Hercules, like Botticelli's Spring and Leonardo's Science, courage, beauty, intelligence, on the whirls of corruption Machiavelli saw and succumbed to, putting Borgia's treacherous henchman Michelotto in command of the Florentine militia for a sellout with hardly a battle. Crucifige. Donatello pierced the Renaissance in Padua. Penitence veers back from the north as Savonarola is called to San Marco from Ferrara. But in this Dell'Arca Pietà and the Passion motets, reform rides humanist liberation. So the trumpet that roused Savonarola was Virgil's warning from the severed roots. Heu, fuge crudelis terras, fugelitu Savarum. Fly, fly, the ruthless land, the shore of greed. No medieval voice rages in those sermons against pagan Florence and the Church of Rome. They have not only destroyed the Church of God, but built up another of sticks, Christians dry as tinder for the fires of hell. The only hope that now remains to us is that the sword of God may soon smite the earth. As the dying Lorenzo turned his back on that holy arrogance, lightning struck the cathedral dome, a comet flared, the Florentine lions fought, and the most beautiful was killed. Give the people of Florence their freedom, said Savonarola, already risking mob rule, opening private houses to the search for vanities. Well, he would learn at his own trial how much his populace cared for justice and truth. While Machiavelli, observing the files from the Palazzo Vecchio, would write, all unarmed prophets fail. Savonarola. In my imagination I saw a black cross over the Babylon of Rome, and on it was written Ira Domini, and above it rained every weapon and hailstones and stones, with thunder and lightning and dark and abysmal weather. And I saw another cross, a golden one, that came from the sky to earth over Jerusalem, and on it was written Misericordia Dei, and there the weather was serene, clear, and very bright. And I saw angels arrive with the red cross. Botticelli's break with the Medici past reflects those doomsday sermons. Savonarola's attack was on the Borgia Pope Alexander VI. It is hard from the restraint of his Vatican apartments or of the tromboncino that might have been played there to picture the Nero of whom we read, he vying with his bastard Caesar for the favors of daughter sister Lucrezia, of their famous poisonings, or how that Cesare with the bow of Apollo shot prisoners as they dodged in the courtyard, while the golden-haired Lucrezia and the Pope looked on. Then Pius and the warring Julius II, Michelangelo's patron, and in 1513 the banqueting Medici, Leo X. Since we have been given the papacy by God, for God's sake let us enjoy it, whom Luther would address in 1520 between rage and naive hope. Leo, most blessed Father, I have never thought ill of you personally. I have called you a Daniel in Babylon, but I have truly despised your see, which neither you nor anyone else can deny is more corrupt than any Babylon or Sodom, the most shameless of all brothels, the kingdom of sin, death, and hell. It is not that Gothic energies from Savonarola to Counter-Reformation cease or slack off, but that they clothe themselves in carnal fabrics. Sodomite Signorelli flexes the Medicean arts in a foreshadowing of Michelangelo's darker judgment. At a time as complex as any in world history, Europe becomes a voltaic pile, stretched over electric fields of North, South, Gothic, Classic, Christian, Humanist, Medieval, Modern, blending hues in every heart and work, while power explodes to the New World and implodes in Protestantism. How is such a folded convolution to be exhibited at all? The amplest ingathering is in the music of Josquin des Prés. His miserere forging of angular rhythm and massive chord impels Dürer's Four Horsemen, that Gothic apocalypse, the Angers tapestries lashed to physical storm, down over the Italy of Signorelli and of Michelangelo, where Dürer made art pilgrimages and Josquin passed most of his productive life. There is another Josquin and another Dürer. This laurel-crowned melancholy, heaped round with attributes of thought, idleness, suicide. Josquin's handling of Dido's last love lament, Dulcis exuviae. As if in classical renewal, Lucretius' ennui must deepen under the rays of light over ocean to the brooding flaw of Hamlet. It is most of all in architecture that 1500 Europe is cloven by the Alps. The classical orders, coffered vault and dome, dominate Bramante's Italy. But if we seek in music, where no classical orders survived, a comparable cleavage, what is most Italian, those choral lauds and frottoli that point to operatic song, were written not only by Tromboncino and the rest, but by Flemish Josquin. While in the north, Gothic spills over 1500 in a lacy network of stone, often, as here at Beauvais, completing 13th century structures, while late Gothic verse ties knots of rhyme, Henryson, Superne, Lucerne, Guberne, this pestilence, preserve and serve that we not sterve therein, or Dunbar, Hail, ying, bening, fresh, flourishing, hail, Alphes, habitacle, the ding offspring made us to sing before his tabernacle. For a musical parallel, it is again Josquin who twines the contrapuntal as well as anyone. Thus the six-voice canonic close of the motet Benedicta. Even in architecture, the geographical divide is deceptive. Through the whole Renaissance and into the centuries after, Milan Cathedral was sprouting minarets over a city given to the smooth accords of Bramante and Leonardo. While the tendrilled fans, applied now to churches of the north, build a ceremonious earthly bower within the inherited sternness of the medieval. So the plain-song floriations of Wolsey's choirmaster Taverner enwreathed the Tudor transformation of Christ Church Norman choir. In the stained-glass soaring of Ulm, Serlin's minstrel Pythagoras sings as with personal passion. So many songs caught up in sacred masses. Western wind, when wilt thou blow, that small rain down can rain? Christ, if my love were in my arms, and I in my bed again. Like the German, es ist ein Schnee gefallen. A deep snow has fallen before the snows are due. Boys pelt me with snowballs, my path is lost in snow. My house yawns at the gable, our years have made it old. The door bolts are broken, my little room is cold. Sweet love, in loving pity, shield me from my woe. Fold me to your body, and let the winter go. Ach, lieb, lass dich erbarmen, dass ich so elend bin, und schließ mich in deine Arme, so fährt der Winter hin. About 1478, the Portinari altar by Hugo van der Goes of Bruges was set up in Florence. The realism which delighted the town climaxed in the shepherds left, pressing in as from carols and mystery plays. When Wat to Bedlam come was, he sweat, he had gone faster than a pace. He found Jesu in a simple place, between an ox and an ass. He was a good herder's boy, oot hoy, for in his pipe he made so much joy. 7 years later, Ghirlandaio, to whom Michelangelo was apprenticed, painted his harmonious response. These familiar shepherds enter into a stable, thatched over a classical ruin, where the feed trough is an inscribed sarcophagus. No wonder they have the conscious measure of Poliziano's pastoral vignettes. To see the rustic as he tends his sheep unbar the gate for the passing of his flock. Or delle pecorelle il rozzo mastro si vede alla sua torma aprir la sbarra. In the homespun ripening of this Schongauer, which Dürer would make Lutheran, we have a German version of what Renaissance Christendom, with Erasmus as its ablest spokesman, everywhere hoped for, a kind of biblical humanization by quiet reform. The Son itself is not as common and accessible to all as is Christ's teaching. I would that even the lowliest women read the Gospels and the Pauline epistles, and I would that they were translated into all languages, that the farmer might sing some portion of them at the plough, the weaver hum them to the movement of his shuttle, the traveller lighten the weariness of his journey with such stories as these. That heritage of faith freed and naturalized is a 1500 starting point. Let the three-voiced canon from Josquin's Ave Verum Corpus, in its first Dijon recording, with the Maître de Moulin's Virgin in Glory, express what was shared from Memling to Metzis and from Perugino to Raphael. The formative genius of the 1500 enrichment was Leonardo, and he had entered the promised land, Vasari's terza maniera, 20 years before.
Chiaro ciel pensate a te cadente, a quel vero signor di paradiso.
In music, the shift was from the medieval adding of parts to what Leonardo stressed in painting, to render a proportioned and harmonious view of the whole. Leonardo, indeed, who came to the service of Sforza as a musician playing a fantastic skull-shaped lyre, applies with Aron and Gaffori the same spatial sense to music. The union of proportional parts sounded simultaneously. In the 1500 Laude, how like the sfumato which shadows Leonardo's space is the melting of tonal fullness in complicities of minor. Can we draw from Leonardo's notebooks the heart of that mystery? Shadow partakes of the nature of universal things, which are all more powerful at their beginning and grow weaker toward the end. And drawn on by my eager desire, having wandered for some distance among the overhanging rocks, I came to the mouth of a huge cavern, before which for a time I remained stupefied, my back bent to an arch, my left hand clutching my knee, while with the right I made a shade for my lowered and contracted eyebrows. And as I leaned one way and then the other to see if I could discern anything, suddenly I was aware of two contrary states, fear and desire. Fear of the threatening dark cavern, desire to see what marvels it might contain. Longing for the source, like that of the moth for the light. In the godlike expansion of nature and man, something has replaced the demon adversary of Christian good. What Leonardo saw from his summit of thought was not only the fury of war, della crudeltà dell'uomo, but deeper, the smiling enigma of force, as in Carnot's second law, that energy quickens by its own decay. Force I define as an incorporeal agency, an invisible power. It is born in violence and dies in liberty, and the greater it is, the more quickly it is consumed. It desires to conquer and slay the cause of opposition, and in conquering it destroys itself. Without force, nothing moves. Axiomatic that in the 1500 dream of calm, where Satan slacks off, entropy appears. For the strongest contrast of that south and north against Leonardo, 1452 to 1519, set Bosch, about 1450 to 1516, deep in transreal Gothic, what spoke at the same time in every man, English morality play from the Dutch. Here shall you see how fellowship and jollity, both strength, pleasure, and beauty, will fade from thee as the flower in May. For ye shall hear how our heaven King calleth every man to a general reckoning. Give audience and hear what he doth say. God, where art thou, death, thou mighty messenger? Go thou to every man and show him in my name a pilgrimage. The structures are medieval, but as in a process of mineralization, every grain has been replaced. In the cast of art and drama, Bosch meets with Leonardo. For centuries his forebears had been filling in and individualizing Gothic, this 1440 hell gate as mouth and arse, fitting Christian vision to the feel of man and matter. The moral fact boiling from the church close to the square in all those guild towns may be measured by the stage direction in the castle of Perseverance. Look that the devil have gunpowder brenning in pipes in his hands and in his ears and in his earth when he goeth to battle. So the created earth, painted on the closed wings of Bosch's Garden of Delights, may be medieval in conception, an egg of land and water, cloud and sky, closed in a crystalline shell, but its space reaches into the future, wonderful as the iconography with which Bosch peoples it. Revolution floats in amniotic calm before the battle of values begins, visionary as Ockegham's Mass for the Dead. $1,500 Dunbars, grosser sins, then idleness at the second call, came like a sow from a mud hole. He had a sleepy snout, many a swag-bellied, sluggish glutton, many a lazy slut and sloven were servants in his rout. The spread altar reaches from Adam and Eve through the pursuit of happiness to a hell landscape of satanic mills. Obrecht's Marian Mass for 3 to 7 voices and tied by a cabal of number symbols has that spectral vastness. But it is the older Ockeghem who rides the hell energy cresting under halcyon calm. Save the soul from fiends and from the lake of hell, de manu inferni e de profundo lacu. A window into the soul of Europe on the verge of colonial conquest and Protestant war, and with Bosch, as if sprouted from the aspri sterpi of Dante's wood of suicides, compare a Gawain Douglas dream of 1501. My ravished spirit in that desert wasteful drew to the margin of a river hateful, that like Cocytus the ugly stream infernal, with its vile water made a hideous trouble, spilling overhead, blood red and impossible it should have been a river natural. This loathly flood like rumbling thunder routed, wherein the demon fish so elvish shouted, their wild yelps deafened and benumbed my hearing. At those grim monsters my weak spirit doubted. None through the soil but spunky trees there sprouted, combust, barren, bloomless, no leaf bearing, old rotten runts wherein no sap was working, the most part waste, with withered branches moulded. It was a den well fit for murderers lurking. Wherefore I was myself right sore aghast. The whistling wind blew many a bitter blast. The bare limbs rattled, I could scarcely stand. Out through the wood I crept on foot and hand. The river stank, the trees they clattered fast. That soil was naught but marsh and slime and sand. Small wonder if earthly joy, stemming such a demonism as would haunt succeeding centuries, should be ensphered by Bosch in vegetable bubbles. Was not the humanist hope of Leonardo and his time so islanded? The 1507 Symposium Castiglione celebrates in the courtier a discourse opened by Della Rovere, who would kill his sister's lover next year, a cardinal then, for smiling at him, and connive, it was said, at the sack of Rome, while Bembo, poet, climber, and libertine, afterwards papal secretary and cardinal, closes it with a paean to platonic love. Let us climb up the stairs, which at the lowermost step have the shadow of sensual beauty, to the high mansion place where the heavenly, amiable, and right beauty dwelleth, which lieth hidden in the innermost secrets of God. Meanwhile the dawn has come, nature espousing the flight of the soul. When the windows then were opened on the side of the palace that hath his prospect toward the high top of Mount Cattray, they saw already in the east a fair morning like unto the colour of roses, and all stars voided, saving only the sweet governess of heaven, Venus, which keepeth the bounds of the night and day. Though the gleaming nature of this Giorgione background was dawning everywhere, even in English poetry, till at the last I came to a dale, beholding Phoebus declining low and pale, with my greyhounds in the fair twilight, I sat me down for to rest me all night. That is from Hawes' Pastime of Pleasure, Grand Amour's quest for love and virtue, still, like this Flemish miniature, also of 1500, cultivating the garden of the romance of the rose, Hawes. Amidst the garden there was resplendissant a dulcet spring and mellifluous fountain, beside which fountain the most fair lady, la belle Pucelle, was gaily sitting. In the interfusion of Gothic and rebirth, the airy transparency of the miniature ripens, as the myth of chivalry swells toward Ariosto. From 1490 on, Dürer had applied those skills to a landscape liberation of the forest-cleared and fruitful Germany before the outbreak of religious wars, against Hell Bosch, a faith as natural as Cornish would voice in Tudor English. Pleasure it is to hear iwis the birdies sing, the deer in the dale, the sheep in the vale, the corn springing. God's purveyance for sustenance it is for man. Then we always to give him praise, and thank him then, and thank him then. The easy polarities of century and geography blur. 1495 finds both Bosch and Dürer in the north, in Italy the Piagnoni beside Leonardo. Though what was uppermost was humanist, the Christian myth composed to classical drama. In Josquin's deep lament for Ockeghem, nymphs of the woods and streams join in the Requiem Aeternam. With Josquin's lament, written in Italy to a French poem for a Flemish master, we have ranged Leonardo's Last Supper, most famous picture in the world, with this anonymous entombment carved in a pilgrimage church near Reims. How Christian Platonism has quieted Gothic pain. Erasmus. He is the true theologian who teaches that all good men should be loved and cherished equally as members of the same body, that evil men should be tolerated if they cannot be corrected, that those who mourn are blessed and should not be deplored, and that death should even be desired by the devout, since it is nothing other than a passage to immortality. From the same essay, what else is the philosophy of Christ, which he himself calls a rebirth, than the restoration of human nature, originally well formed? In the Christ study, as in most of his works, Leonardo proclaims that restoration. The new tomb grows shadowed and calm, as in Stephen Hawes, after the day there cometh the dark night. For though the day be never so long, at last the bells ringeth to even song. The transforming death poem had been written in Italy in the 1480s by the imprisoned politician and humanist Colinuccio. Though the close turns to Christ, who in dying made death sweet and beautiful, dolce bella morendo fe la morte, the body of the ode invokes Platonic release, as sacra, splendida, generosa, inclita, the comfort of the soul, come pure from heaven, weary of a world of tumultuous and elemental war. This hymn to death, for every shipwrecked soul, the port of healing, O porto salutar, che sol conforte d'ogni naufragio il mal, splendida morte, swells with the personal pity and anodyne, which caused the statue of Guidorello, warrior, who died in 1501, to be kissed and prayed to as to a romantic saint. In the general amplification, not only Pico della Mirandola acclaimed man as unlimited self-maker, thou, restrained by no narrow bounds, according to thy own free will, in whose power I have placed thee, shalt define thy nature for thyself. Ficino had extended the Platonic flight to a temporal progress toward Godhead. The soul desires, endeavors, and begins to become God, and makes progress every day. Hence our soul will sometime be able to become, in a sense, all things, and even to become a god. How could Machiavelli, facing the 1512 Leonardo, think Christianity had sapped will and drive, where the inner dynamic, against the classical, was so recklessly advanced? Whatever wrought the change was active also in the northern towns. Peter Fischer cast this St. Paul in Nuremberg about the time Leonardo sketched his own image and Raphael chose it for Plato's in the school of Athens, conscious nobility ceding itself over Europe. Yet in that augmentation a deeper cleavage, as between reason and heart, was to rack the century. It is the separation of enlightened, conforming humanism from militant conscience as categorical guide. I laid a hen's egg, said Erasmus. Luther hatched a bird of another kind. Dürer's possession by the nude self as the man of sorrows recalls Luther's insistence as he tore up the bull, So hilf mir Gott, ich kann nicht anders. Suppose, Erasmus had answered Luther on free will, that in a certain sense it is true that God works both good and evil in us, and rewards his own works in us, and punishes his evil ones. What a door to impiety this pronouncement would open if spread abroad in the world. Against that dialectic prudence, Luther flames in Christ's seizure. God foresees, purposes, and does all things according to his immutable, eternal, and infallible will. By this thunderbolt, free will is utterly dashed to pieces. Peace and tranquility of flesh are with you of greater consideration than the word of God. Let me tell you this, I am seeking an object so great it ought to be maintained and defended through death itself, even if the whole world should be hurled into chaos and reduced to nothing. And yet Erasmus, in his strangest work, In Praise of Folly, reaches, like Durer's Christ-man, toward the revelation of comic paradox. Lear's fool, Cervantes' mocked knight as saving clown. Since, in praising folly, in a way not wholly foolish, Erasmus juxtaposes three masks, the laughable, as of old women in heat, which opens to the life-giving illusion of Sisyphus. All things are presented by shadows, yet this play is put on no other way. The mask of depravity, which he castigates, and third, in the last reversing chamber of the Silenus, the noble follies of Platonic thought and Christian charity, where a taste of future happiness drowns our knowledge of the world. Bosch's 1515 Bearing of the Cross has no weirder transition. In taking up the weight of the new century and of Leonardo's grotesques, late Bosch prepares for the Protestant agony. Earth and soul so fallen that man is mere stercus, a pile of dung, which only the snow of Christ can cover, so that God looking down may see the purity of his own salvation. Luther, the human will is a beast between. If God sit thereon, it wills and goes where God will. If Satan sit thereon, it wills and goes as Satan will. Yet how satanically ambiguous God's Lutheran sitting. When I fart in Wittenberg, they smell it in Rome. From 1500 to 1520, before the North became a battleground, the life that would polarize and harden swirls in the temporal wake of art-loving and indulgence-peddling Rome. Is there a richer delight than in the fairy-tale Christianity Altdorfer shares with folk song? Es ist ein Ros entsprungen aus einer Wurzel zart. Luther, too, joins that dance in his Gabriel hymn. Vom Himmel hoch, da komm ich her, ich bring euch gute neue Meer. Not to mention the rose of Sharon wonder of his Bible. Ich bin eine Blume zu Saron und eine Rose im Tal. Luther's favorite musician was Senful, whose most fetching piece is a Christmas bell song. This Catholic joy smiles the immediacy of Protestant birth. In Grunewald, joy sharpens with the prick of pain. So the great Faust cry of Hutton, the spirits awake, there is love and joy in living. Die Geister erwachen, es ist eine Lust zu leben, sounds from the breaking wave. History is powered by tragic excess. Reformation only to be pushed by a temperament capable in its prime of Luther's imperative of freedom. I declare that neither Pope nor Bishop nor anyone else has the right to impose so much as a single syllable of obligation upon a Christian man without his own consent. Why were Christ and all the martyrs put to death? Because without consulting the preservers of old knowledge, they brought forth a new thing. And after, of lashing out at the poor who had taken his freedoms to heart, against the thieving and murdering hordes of the peasants, whoso can strike, smite, strangle, or stab, secretly or publicly, such wonderful times are these that a prince can better merit heaven with bloodshed than another with prayer. The poor thereafter to call him not Luther, but Lügner, liar. The Grunewald legend has this core of truth, that Martis der Maler did go Lutheran, against his church, his patron, and his daring art. And in England, the fiercest genius of music, Taverner, repented after 1528 of popish ditties, destroyed what he could, and closed his life breaking church windows and despoiling altars. What survives that visionary adventure? The humanist North roused to Erasmus, 1509, age of gold. Reason is as great as a king, a divine counselor presiding in its high citadel. Remembering its origin, it thinks of nothing sordid, of nothing base. Hutton, a precursive Tom Paine, summoning German youth. Come hither, all ye who want to be free. Here the tyrant shall be smitten, here the bondage shall be broken. Where are you, freemen? Where are you, nobles, men of great names? Where are you? Luther, every Christian is anointed and sanctified in body and soul with the oil of the Holy Spirit. An early portrait by Cranach, 1502, fresh with that morning. What remains when genius is consumed in polemic, as Erasmus, 1521, would complain? And the more I love the inborn ability of Hutton, the more I grieve that it was snatched away from us by these disorders. For what did it avail to have Reuchlin, burdened enough thus far, weighed down with heavier ill will? Luther could have taught the evangelical philosophy with great profit to the Christian flock, if he had refrained from those things which could only end in disturbance. The last portrait of Cranach, half a century later, gives a solemn answer. In the deeper hardening of Europe, of which Erasmus grieves in his last letters, the Anabaptists, a race of men frenzied and devoted to death, have inundated Lower Germany. Vives writes that John Vergara, together with Brother Tovar and several other learned men, is in prison. You know, I imagine, that the three most learned men in all England are in jail, the Bishop of Rochester, the Bishop of London, and Thomas More, a dearer friend than any other I have ever had. Man withdraws into a stronghold of consciousness. Ein fester Burg ist unser Gott. Aus tiefer Not schrei ich zu dir. From the depths of need I cry to thee. Old Barcelona summarizes 2,000 years in the history of Spain. What is visible ranges from Roman at the heavy-walled base, through Gothic and flamboyant, to a filigree of Rococo at the crown. Though buried below are cyclopean walls of the pre-Greek, Greek shards and marble, traces of Carthage, while the city spreads beyond to the Art Nouveau fantasies of Gaudi. The Spain of colonial conquest rested on that base with all the levels of period style. At the end of the 12th century at Compostela, Romanesque is shading into Gothic, as in France, but with an archaic, wild excess. And in the contemporary conducti from Ripoli, note against note chords, dance Ile-de-France rhythms. By 1400, French, Italian, and Flemish are fused as everywhere into an international Gothic, which in Des Tournes sets up one of many signs on the way to Bosch. In Catalan music also, the Hucket of Machaut and the Italians softens toward familiar style. During that century, the most impassioned realism was absorbed from Avignon, Flanders, and the North Italian to toughen in Bermejo, 1490, as in the music of De la Torre, to a Cid militance of carnal faith, Adoramos te, Señor. At this point, the daring of a Genoese navigator opened the New World to a crusading energy which had barely consolidated a subcontinent, broken by Dark Age invasions, Moors, and chivalry. All the nations of Europe have been mad, and so variously no one could name the maddest, but the Spanish must rank high. What went over the sea in German imperial dress, and with all the financing and skill of Flemish bottoms, under the protection, of course, of the papal virgin, had the outward style and softness of high Renaissance Italian, but it bore from the windy uplands where Gothic Moorish castles were still being built, and ballad laments of the fall of Granada sung, a chivalric mysticism that would lash conquistadores from Mexico clear to Panama and Colorado. For ships from the engineering West to encounter the Stone Age was not so remarkable. What must have staggered the moral being was to confront a civilization in some way higher than their own, though evolved in isolation from a primitive base and without even the use of the wheel. Cities larger and richer than theirs, an astronomical calendar, libraries of religion and law, and an art that left Dürer speechless when he saw its spoils in Antwerp. A civilization with an already mythic past, Teotihuacan, deserted 1,000 years before, its pyramids of the sun and moon and street of the dead, called by the living Aztecs work of the gods. A new world of wonders spread out in time and space. 600 miles south and east, the Maya ruins, upland, lowland, peninsula, lost in forest, Palenque, sunlit under a leafy sea. A life, music, and poetry, fabulous then, irrecoverable now. Though the carved plinths and stele, this from the Temple of the Cross at Palenque, some death god or panther priest smoking a ritual cigar, cult scenes alive with what Christendom had long since banished into hell, recover one thing for us instantly, the crusading Christian jolt in the presence of a tradition so refined and so idolatrously savage, alien as the Popol Vuh sequence this relief suggests, when Hunter and Seven Hunter, and later Hunter and Jaguar Deer, gone to the underworld house of darkness, where the gods hot seat them and laugh like a swarm of flies, are given cigars they must smoke all night and return in the morning unconsumed. And as if to raise the strain beyond psychic endurance, the antithesis had grown in the Aztec Empire to such a sublimity and terror as this colossal goddess of the serpent skirt, found later under the charred ruins of what had been the greatest city of the world, drives home, a more than Moloch, more than Bhagavad Gita divinity of vulture and snake, a monolith of rattle, talon, and fang, which all the human sacrifices of Montezuma's rule of art, justice and wisdom could not appease. What could Christian chivalry do, pledged since Roland to archangelic war, this knight spearing a devil in the 12th century frescoes of Tavant, Columbus too having told the Cuban chief, where no Caribs would survive, that the first cause of his coming was to instruct them in godly knowledge and true religion, though he was then amassing gold, and especially to punish the cannibals and such mischievous evil-doers. What could that conquering Inquisition do with a mystery as beyond its ken as the plumed serpent, but melt into bouillon its ornaments and idols, and gathering from cities and libraries all codices, pictographs, and writings, to the priestly censing and sprinkling eradicate, in one giant auto da fe, the entire civilized evidence of a world they would occupy, as a virus takes over the genetic mechanism of the host, while Luther at the same time threw his inkwell at the devil to exorcise what blasted him within. By 1518, Juan de Grijalva was exploring westward from the island of Cozumel. His chaplain describes towns on the coast of Yucatan, and to the south a walled city, the ruins now of Tulum. Next day, a little before sunset, we perceived far in the distance a town or village so big that the city of Seville could not appear larger or better, and a huge tower was seen in it. It was the beginning of the thrust that would take Cortez to the throne of Mexico. At the heart of that conquest lies an exploit, weird as the satanic invention of cannon in Paradise Lost. When the assault hinged on gunpowder, the Cavalier Montaño, with 4 other Spaniards, climbed to the 3-mile-high crater of Popocatépetl, and was lowered in a basket repeatedly, 400 feet, into a deeper hellhole of smoke and flame, to scrape off sulfur from the lava walls. That fiery brimstone fed the final massacring charge on Mexico City. Palpable that the damned eruption Bosch divined in panels fondly acquired by the Spanish crown powered the reduction of new worlds. In Irving's Columbus, as signs of land multiply and no land appears, the sailors think them signs of the devil, delusions beguiling them on to destruction. While Columbus praises the goodness of God in thus conducting them by soft breezes across a tranquil ocean, with fresh signs guiding them to a promised land. Against jealous temptation, the kindly rewarder of the temporal quest. And the proof was at hand, the land, though it too might seduce with power. But whatever the backward urge or forward danger, the die was cast. Leonardo's angel and John were smiling, his girl pointing across the stream. His bearded face was wise with futurity. Giorgione learned it from Leonardo, the accord of nature and man. This gypsy and soldier, his own birth illegitimate, like a rest on the flight with a nude Mary and profane Joseph. Was that enchantment as merely ideal as the pastoral elegy Sanazzaro now wreathed in the harmonies Milton would love and pursue? Thee, shepherd, thee the woods and desert caves, with wild thyme and the gadding vine o'ergrown, and all their echoes mourn. I fiumi il sanno, e le spelunche I faggi, and like Lycidas, Sanazzaro's lament leads to an Arcadian paradise, where other groves and other streams along, altri monti, altri piani, altri boschetti e rivi, vedi nel cielo, e più novelli fiori, till all that heaven rejoices to hear their new and unaccustomed voices. If any spirit of love among you dwell, oaks of shade and gloom, cast here a shadow for this quiet tomb. Se spirito alcun d'amor vive fra voi, querce frondose folte, fate ombra alla quiete ossa sepolte. What is the gift of art if not to make dream real, but the symbolic dream of total ambiguous reality? Giorgione's gypsy family, the richest strain of Venetian high Renaissance, takes its usual title, La Tempesta, from its cloud and lightning sky, a demon flash in the beckoning of calm. Leonardo, force is of brief duration, because it desires perpetually to subdue its cause, and when this is subdued, it kills itself. One ought not to desire the impossible.